Hello class, today we're going to be going over evaluating sources. Actually 3 chapters in the Lunsford. This might be a lengthy lesson, so maybe I'll kind of try to cut it halfway, but if I can keep this short, that'd be great. It's been a while too. How's it going? So what I want to look at is we're going to look at 3 chapters. We're going to look at chapter 19 in the Lunsford. Okay, everything's an argument, right? Evaluating sources. Chapter 20, using sources. And chapter 21, plagiarism and academic integrity. Okay, if you could turn with me to page 454, I want to really run through this really quickly. I'm going to run through evaluating sources a little bit quickly here. Don't want to spend too much time, but this is going to be a build off directly from our library research orientation. Okay, and specifically, when we evaluate sources, we're going to use also that video we watched last week on CRAP. I know it's funny, but CRAAP, excuse me, kind of went through that fast, right? But I'm going to build on that, okay? I want to build on that, as we saw, that was a way to look at sources and understand them for what they are, okay? And understand that they are, sometimes we have to have a critical lens when evaluating sources. Okay, we can't just find, say for example, some dude's blog post from his mom's garage or something, right? We gotta understand that there's got to be some method in being critical analyzers of our sources. Okay, first thing I want to go through in this evaluating sources page, we can get right into it. Okay, what I want to look at is maybe on 456. Okay, this idea of bias. Okay, we understand that when we have sources that aren't the most credible, one of the ways to distinguish that is bias. Okay, but I want to read this here. How do we correct for bias? Okay, to correct for bias is draw on as many reliable sources as you can handle when you're preparing to write. Okay, don't assume that all arguments are equally good or that all sides in a controversy can be supported by the same weight of evidence and good reasons, but you want to avoid choosing sources so selectively that you miss essential issues and perspectives. Okay, so this is important. When analyzing bias, and obviously it depends what you're writing on, but if there's an argument, say for example, I've read sources that don't really feel magical realism is a valuable literary resource, okay? And we're going to be looking at that in the final prompt as well. But I would also like to not ignore that. Maybe I'm writing a paper about the values of magical realism and something you could write about in the People of Paper, okay? I'm not going to ignore the article that also critiques it, okay? Because I want to have a well-rounded argumentation, and sometimes having a well-rounded argumentation definitely asks that you engage all perspectives here, okay? Even if you feel that it might be a little biased and it starts from a frame of negative framing, that's something you can maybe utilize in your paper, okay? Or maybe you're looking at a topic and it completely changes your perspective on it, okay? So I want us to think about that as we move along here, okay? Let's go to 457, page 457, okay? At the top, this is how we assess print resources, okay? Since you want information to be reliable and persuasive, it pays to evaluate each potential source thoroughly. The following principles can help you evaluate print materials, okay? This is something I want you to think about. This is an extenuation of the CRAAP method, okay? And I'm going to just kind of run through these, and hopefully I'm not going to go through all of them because I think some of them are a bit repetitive from if we learned in the CRAP video. But here, there are some that I want to really hammer home. Okay, relevance. First one, under 457, begin by asking what a particular source will add to your argument and how closely the source is related to your argumentative claim. For a book, the table of contents in the index may help you decide. For an article, look for an abstract that summarizes its content. If you can't identify what the source will add to your research, set it aside. You can almost certainly find something better. Okay, so relevance is an interesting term because not only is it relevant to the topic at hand, but then as you sharpen and get your paper more specific, you want to then say, is it relevant to my overall claim and my thesis? This is where you become a critical researcher, okay? Credentials of the author. Sometimes the author's credentials are set forth in an article, in a book, or on a website, so be sure to look for them. Is the author an expert on the topic? To find out, you can gather information about the person on the web easily enough, although you should check and cross-check what you discover. Another way to learn about the credibility of an author is to search Google Groups for postings that mention the author, or to check a citation index to find out how other writers refer to this author. This is awesome, okay? If necessary, ask a librarian for assistance. As I went through, there's an Ask a Librarian tab in the library. You can also shoot them an email, or you can ask me. Okay, it's something to think about. Stance of the author. What's the author's position on the issue involved? How does his stance influence the information in the source? Does the author's stance support or challenge your own views? Okay, this is very important. You always want to have a little bit of background research on the author if it helps your argumentation. Okay, understanding where they come from that could be the crux of how you choose that. Because what about if you're writing about on the FX of magical realism and they are somebody who is cited constantly in that realm, you may want to say, okay, this is an article or a theorist I want to use, since this community, this learning community, this academic community gives them credence and relevance. Okay. Credentials of the publisher or sponsor. If you source from a newspaper, is it a major one, such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post? Be careful, because all of those are slanted in some way, right? If it has historical credentials in reporting, or is it a tabloid? Is it a popular magazine like the Oprah magazine, or a journal sponsored by a professional group, such as the Journal of the American Medical Association? If your source of the book is a publisher one you recognize, or that its own website, when you don't know the reputation of a source, ask several people with more expertise, a librarian, an instructor, or a professional in the field. Okay. Stance of the publisher sponsor. Sometimes the stance will be obvious. A magazine called Save the Planet will take a pro-environmental position, whereas one called America First will probably take a populist stance. But other times you need to read carefully between the lines to identify particular positions and see how the stance affects the message the source presents. Start by asking what the source goals are. What does a publisher or sponsoring group want to make happen? Okay. I like to think about this, and like I said, it always comes back to politics in this class for some reason. But when you have a favorite politician, I always like to ask the question, who pays them, right? Where do they get their donations from? Which lobby groups want their, because I think that really matters. You can see it in their legislation. You can see it in how they approach who they're trying to make happy. It's something we can think about. Currency. Check the date of publication of every book and article. Recent sources are often more useful than older ones, particularly in the sciences. However, in some fields such as history and literature, okay, the most authoritative works may well be the older ones. Okay, so obviously I'm teaching you to be a critical researcher here. This is not going to be a skill that is isolated to this class. You'll be a critical researcher moving forward in college, in other classes, whenever you have to write a research paper. So always understand your context, right? If you are a science major, sure, you want it to be most current, right? You're not going to talk about an old procedure where it's been updated in the last 2 years, 10 years, etc. But for literature, maybe the seminal text, or the text where everybody goes to, is one that was written 50 years ago, okay? Or a theory, for example. This is where you, as a critical researcher, need to understand the value of currency and how recent it has to be, okay? Because say, for example, you have an old theory that's dismantled, but the dismantling of it you don't feel is warranted, or it's not relevant to your claim, that's something you probably would choose not to use. Okay. Accuracy. Check to see whether the author cites any sources for the information, and I'm sorry, I'm on 458 here, or opinions in the article, and if so, how credible and current they are. Level of specialization. Journal sources can be helpful as you begin your research, but later in the project you may need the authority or currency of more focused sources. Keep in mind that highly specialized work on your topic may be difficult for your audience to understand. Okay, and we'll go through these really quickly. On the top of 459, documentation. Purely academic sources such as scholarly journal articles will contain thorough citations, but you should also check the more popular sources you use routinely, identify their sources, or provide verifiable evidence for claims they make. This is a really important point here. The reason that we use in academia and in college, we use scholarly journals, is because there's verifiable evidence. They have cited pages, just like you will be creating for this research paper. You have a works cited page, okay? In many web sources, documentation takes the form of links to the evidence cited, okay? That's a great kind of testing point here. If your research does not have credible, verifiable evidence, say, for example, I'll be reading your paper. If I have trouble finding that source that you're using, that's a problem. Okay, it has to be verifiable evidence. That's why we write papers in this way. That's why research papers are. That's why we have citations, works cited, etc. Okay. Let's go to the next one here. Audience. Was a source written for general readership, for specialists, for advocates, or opponents? Okay, always consider your audience. What are you teaching? Who are you teaching? Length. Is the source long enough to provide adequate details in support of your claim? Okay, this research paper should be 6 to 7 pages. but that's a minimum. Okay, so what appropriate length do you feel you need? Do you want to go 8, maybe 9? It's up to you. Availability, do you have access to the source? If it isn't readily accessible, your time might be better spent looking elsewhere. Okay, this one's also relevant to El Camino. Unfortunately, we don't have every source. Okay, so you may see a few resources where like it's such a great source, but you can't click on it. Unless you can access it in other ways. Okay, try to find it on the web somehow. That's a source you would probably want to move on from. Okay, unless that's just a source that you need. Maybe find another way. Find local libraries. Maybe find a way to tap into a Cal State. You know, I wish there was an easier way here in El Camino to tap into Cal States. You know, maybe something we can see in the future. Unfortunately, we can't do that now. Okay, but there are opportunities to at least try to expand your, you know, readership or to access to materials if you can. Okay. Availability, and then we talked about that. Omissions, what's missing or omitted from the source. Might such exclusions affect whether or how you can use the source as evidence? Okay, so always be mindful, be critical of what they're omitting or talking about. Okay, want to move ahead here. Let's go to using sources on page 464. Okay, like I said, I think that early part is pretty self-explanatory. You can read through that and teach yourself. It's very similar to what we had evidenced in the CRAAP model, CRAP method. Okay. But it's, as I said, it's such a valuable resource to be, or such a valuable strategy in being a critical researcher is how you evaluate your sources ultimately. Okay. Let me zoom through this one really quick. Using sources won't be really quick. We got a little bit to unpack here. But what I want to discuss on using sources, and if we go to page 464, is I want to specifically define this term infotension. Okay. Write that down. I'm just kind of circling my notes here, right? Let's read this here. You're practicing infotension. Okay, today it's a truism, and I'm at the bottom of 464, that we are all drowning in information, that it is dousing us like water from a fire hose. Such a situation has advantages. It's never been easier to locate information on any imaginable topic, but also has distinct disadvantages. How do you identify useful and credible sources among the millions available to you? How do you use them well once you've found them? We've addressed the first of these questions in Chapter 18, Finding Evidence, but finding trustworthy sources is only the first step. Experts on technology information like Professors Richard Lanham and Howard Rheingold point to the next challenge, managing attention. It's important. Okay. Lanham points out that our age of information calls on us to resist the allure of every single thing vying for our attention and to discriminate among what deserves notice and what doesn't. Building on this insight, Rheingold has coined the term infotension. I like this term, which he says is a word I came up with to describe a mind-machine combination of brain-powered attention skills and computer-powered information filters. Keyword there is filters. Okay, this is what we do essentially as critical researchers. What do we filter, right? What gets left behind? What gets pushed on the wayside? We're bombarded with information. We have iPhones that literally are information machines. I could just type anything I want at this time and Google and get an answer to something. Alexa, whatever, right? Practicing infotension, and I'm on the second paragraph on 465, calls for synthesizing and thinking critically about the enormous amount of information available to us from the collective intelligence of the web. And while some of us can learn to be mindful while multitasking, a fighter pilot is an example Rheingold gives of those who must learn to do so. Most of us are not good at it and need to train ourselves literally to pay attention to attention and intention as well. To be aware of what we are doing and thinking is to take a deep breath and notice where we are directing our focus. Okay. In short, writers today need to learn to focus their attention, especially online, and learn to avoid distractions. And understanding what distractions are. Okay. So just how do you put all these skills together to practice infotension? Let's think about this term here. We're going to go through this. I want to think about building. I want to skip that. Building a critical mass is important. Okay. And I think you can read through that for yourself. But what I want to go through specifically is I want to hit on these three. I think synthesizing information, paraphrasing sources, summarizing sources. Okay, this is important for me. And I want to go through a couple things here. On 466, let's read that first paragraph under synthesizing information. As you gather information, you must find a way to make all the facts, ideas, point of views, and quotations you have encountered work with and for you. Okay. The process involves not only reading information and recording data carefully, paying infotension, but also pondering and synthesizing it. That is, figuring out how the sources you've examined come together to support your specific claims. Synthesis, a form of critical thinking highly valued by academia, business, industry, and other institutions, especially those that reward innovation and creative thinking, is hard work. It almost always involves immersing yourself in your information or data until it feels familiar and natural to you. To become a critical researcher, the way we prove that is how we share the critical research with others. This is what you're doing here, the research paper. As you see, and I agree with Lunsford and the editors here specifically, this is a critical, vital skill in any job you have, whether you're a nurse, astronaut, engineer, okay, a professor, right? Anything, right? You have this modicum of, you have this way of being that is critical, and you find that this comes with being creative, okay, especially, or innovative, right? So a lot of you want to be these producers, innovative producers, even in business, right? These are the things that are rewarded, okay? The key word here, and what I want you to think about is you must be immersed, okay? And what I mean by that is immersed in the research, so immersed in the research that when you share the information, it becomes natural, and it's almost as if that, like I said, the key word and what I always think about in my essays, or when I want you to read when I want you to achieve in your essays, is how are you teaching the reader the material? That's what's important for me. That's what the crux of this class is. How are you a critical analyzer of what we're discussing, and also a critical teacher of what we're discussing in our essays, okay? So I want you to think about that. So think about how you synthesize, okay, the material, people of paper, but also with the outside resources, so outside sources you're using, okay? And how you are so immersed as a critical thinker and critical analyzer that it almost sounds like second nature, okay? Because to teach something, you must be immersed in it, in my opinion, of course, right? Let's think about this here, okay? 467, I'm at the top, I'm at the end of that paragraph. Throughout this review process, use invitation strategies by asking questions such as the following. Go through these questions, right? Which sources help to set the context for your argument? Keyword there is context, right? What's the situation of your argument? In particular, which items present new information or give audiences an incentive for reading your work? Okay, the incentive, quite simply, is what are you teaching them, right, about this work, about magical realism, metafiction, the larger themes in the novel, etc. What Placencia brings out in the novel, okay? Which items provide background information that is essential for anyone trying to understand your argument, okay? What context, background information? Which items help to define, clarify, or explain key concepts of your case? How can these sources be presented or sequenced so that readers appreciate your claims are as valid or minimum reasonable? Which of your sources might be used to illustrate technical or difficult aspects of your subject? Would it be best to summarize such technical information to make it more accessible, or would direct quotations be more authoritative and convincing? This is upon you, okay? How are you going to make your argument convincing ultimately, okay? Which sources or passages within sources furnish the best support or evidence for each claim or subclaim within your argument? Now is the time to group these together so you can decide how to arrange them most effectively. Which materials do the best job outlining conflicts or offering counterarguments to claims within a project? Which sources might help you address any important objections or rebuttals? Okay. I want to move then, just for the sake of time, we're going to go to the bottom of 467. Paraphrasing. Okay, paraphrasing sources you will use extensively. Okay, so this is something we're going to think about. Okay, in a paraphrase, you put an author's ideas, including major and minor points, into your own words and sentence structures, following the order the author has given them in the original piece. You usually, this is something I want to really make sure we get this, paraphrase sources that you expect to use heavily in a project. But if you compose your notes well, you may be able to use much of the paraphrase material directly in your paper with proper citation. That's the key here. Okay, you have to give citation. If you paraphrase anything that's an idea that's not yours, borrowed sentence structure, terminology, concepts, ideas, you must put in parentheses the page number to give it a paraphrased proper citation, just like as you would a direct quote, because all the language is your own. A competent paraphrase proves you have read material or data carefully. You demonstrate not only that you know what a source contains, but also you appreciate what it means, okay? I'm not going to go through all these, but let's just run through a few here. Guidelines to help you paraphrase accurately and effectively in an academic argument. Identify the source of the paraphrase and comment on the significance or authority of its author. Respect your sources, and this is something we're going to touch on in the chapter 21, plagiarism and academic integrity. Always respect your sources. When paraphrasing an entire work or any lengthy section of it, cover all its main points and any essential details following the same order the author uses. Ask yourself, what is it? If this is a paraphrase, okay, then I have to give the respect to the way they framed it. Changing the order or the ideas or concepts may eliminate the value of the paraphrase and also maybe be misquoting them. Okay. If next one, bullet point at the top, we'll just go through a couple here, right? If you're paraphrasing material that extends over more than one page in the original source, note the placement of page breaks, since it is highly unlikely that we use only part of your paraphrase in your argument. For a print source, you will need the page number to cite the specific page of material you want to use. Next, make sure that the paraphrase is your own words and sentence structures. If you want to include especially memorable or powerful language from the original source, and closing in quotation marks. Okay, so using quotations to selectively and strategically. 471. That's something that's on the next page, right? Keep your own comments, elaborations, or reactions separate from the paraphrase itself. This is important. Your report on the source should be clear, objective, and free of connotative language. Okay. So ask yourself, do I need a paraphrase? Do I need a direct quote here? Or should I provide my own direct analysis? Okay. We're going to go through a couple of these. Summarizing sources on 470. Unlike a paraphrase, a summary records just the gist of a source or a key idea. That is only enough information to identify a point you want to emphasize. Once again, this much shortened version of a source puts any borrowed ideas into your own words. Okay, and I always want you to think about that. When you summarize anything from the text or anything from any text you ever read, you should also have a purpose. What are you summarizing that text for? That's important, okay? Here are some guidelines to help you prepare accurate and helpful summaries. I'll just go through a couple. Identify the thesis or main point in the source and make it the heart of your summary. In a few detailed phrases or sentences, explain to yourself and readers what the source accomplishes. Very good. When using a summary in an argument, identify the source, state its point, and add your own comments about why the material is significant for the argument that you're making. Next, include just enough information to recount the main points you want to cite. A summary is usually much shorter than the original. When you need more information or specific details, you can return to the source itself, or prepare a paraphrase, or provide a direct quote. Okay, but ask yourself, if you're summarizing any part of a text, maybe you're summarizing a small example in a piece of paper, you're summarizing a small example in another work, okay, you always want to return and ask yourself, okay, what is the purpose of this summary? What does it provide? How does it help me teach the piece better to the reader? Okay, let's zoom through here. I want to go through using quotations on the bottom of 471, using quotations selectively and strategically. We've talked a little bit about quote integration, but this is important. To support your argumentative claims, you'll want to quote, that is to reproduce an author's precise words, in at least 3 kinds of situations. These are important here. Bottom of 471. Number 1, when the wording expresses a point so well that you cannot improve it or shorten it without weakening it. Okay, this is when you do not use a paraphrase. Number 2, when the author is a respected authority whose opinion supports your own ideas powerfully, and or number 3, when an author authority challenges or seriously disagrees with others in the field. Okay, continuing on here, consider too that charts, graphs, and images may also function like direct quotations, providing convincing visual evidence for your academic argument. In an argument, quotations from respected authorities will establish your ethos. We know that's your credibility as someone who has sought out experts in the field. Just as important, sometimes direct quotations such as memorable phrase in your introduction, or a detailed eyewitness account, or a character in People of Paper saying something specific to what your larger claim is, may capture your, let's go to 472, reader's attention. Okay. Finally, carefully chosen quotations can broaden the appeal of your argument by drawing on emotion as well as logic, appealing to the reader's mind and heart. Okay, pathos a little bit. Okay. Let's jump down here. The following guidelines can help you quote sources accurately and effectively. Like I said, I'm only going. There's a lot of bullet points here. I want you to go through these on your own. First bullet point on bottom of 472: quote or reproduce materials that readers will find especially convincing, purposeful, and interesting. You should have a specific reason for every quotation. Cannot emphasize that enough. Every quotation that is used, every quotation that is used in your paper, you should have a specific reason for asking that. Quite often in my face-to-face classes, if we have quotes, I will ask the students why. In your own words, right here, if I ask you just point blank, why did you use that quote? You should have a valid reason. If it's just a story tell, it's not enough. If it's just a summarize, it's not enough, right? Because summary is helpful, but we're not book reporting here. And I've said that before. We are not creating book reporting type research papers. If you're book reporting telling me what happened with no inference or purpose, that is a problem, and that will ding your grade a little bit, okay? Don't forget at the bottom here of 472, don't forget the double quotation marks that must surround a direct quotation in American usage. If there's a quote within a quote, it is surrounded by a pair of single quotation marks. British usage does the opposite. In foreign languages often handle direct quotations much differently. Next bullet point on 473, when using a quotation in your argument, introduce its author and follow the quotation with commentary of your own that points out its significance. Okay. Keep quoted material relatively brief. Quote only as much of a passage as is necessary to make your point while still accurately representing what the source actually said. Sometimes it is better to use less than use more. If you find you're doing block quotes, I'm going to ask you: do you need every word of that pair of those quotes? If not, maybe you should change it up a little bit. In your notes, label a quotation you intend to use with a note that tells you where you think you'll use it. I like that. Be an active reader. When you're engaging in this novel, think about that, right? This is a quote. This kind of touches on my larger theme here, okay? Make sure you have all the information necessary to create an in-text citation as well as an item in your works cited list or references list. Okay, cited list or references list. Okay, copy quotations carefully, reproducing the punctuation, capitalization, and spelling exactly as they are in the original. If possible, copy the quotation from a reliable text and paste it directly into your project. Okay, so this is something I want you to definitely engage in. Okay, look at all these bullet points on 473. Understand that you are integrating your sources masterfully, okay, selectively and strategically, as that says here. Okay, patch writing. I want to go into them. I'm going to skip 474 just a little bit. You can read that on your own. Framing materials you borrow with signal words and introductions. There's a great list here on the bottom of 475. These are called signal verbs. And I like this list here because I want you to think about introducing this in this way, because if you constantly use author states, it gets very boring and repetitive. Think about these signal verbs to help you battle that, okay? At the top of 476, obviously using sources to clarify your own supported argument. The best academic arguments have the flavor of a hearty but focused intellectual conversation. Again, at the top of 476. Scholars and scientists create this impression by handling research materials strategically and selectively. Here's how some college writers use sources to achieve their own specific goals within an academic argument. You can go through these on your own. Establish context. Review the literature on a subject. This is something that I want you to think about for the research paper. Specifically, establish context. Review the literature on a subject. Introduce a term or define a concept. Think metafiction. Think magical realism. Okay. Present technical material. Develop or support a claim. Highlight differences or counterarguments. Avoid, and then I want to jump to, and after that I want to go to avoiding patch writing. Okay, I want you to analyze these examples and be careful not to do this in your essay. You will get dinged for this. Okay, when using sources, and I'm on 480, page 480, avoiding patch writing. When using sources in an argument, writers, and especially those new to research-based writing, may be tempted to do what Professor Rebecca Moorhauer terms patch writing, stitching together material from web or other sources without properly paraphrasing or summarizing it with little to no documentation. Okay, here for example is a patchwork paragraph about the dangers wind turbines pose to wildlife. You can read that on your own time. 480, right? This paragraph reads well and is full of details, but it would be considered plagiarized, and this is something we're going to talk about in the next chapter, because it fails to identify its sources and because most of the material has simply been lifted directly from the web. That's a big no-no, and that's considered plagiarism, and we'll get you a 0 on this assignment. So be very careful. I want you to review that, okay? Let's go to 481, but here's the point. An academic writer who has gone to the trouble of finding so much information will gain more credit and credibility. So it's not even an issue of being a trouble or cheating, but why not give yourself, you've done the work, you're doing the research, you're copying it, right? Credit and credibility just by properly identifying, paraphrasing, and quoting the sources used. The resulting paragraph is actually more impressive because it demonstrates how much reading and synthesizing the writer has actually done. You're doing the work. Okay, make sure to quote it specifically. I'm going to stop this video here because it's a little long, but hopefully that gives you a much more developed a concept or idea of how to evaluate sources and also how to integrate your sources. Our next video will be on chapter 21, plagiarism and academic integrity. Thank you.